Hello, and welcome to the Amongst Romans podcast, your window to everything Italy from an outsider's perspective. Join us each week as we navigate the Italian way of life and all the adventures that come along with it.
Now, we've had a lot of episodes that touched on the various foods found in the different regions in Italy, but we haven't really spoken about Italian wines. Now, this is one of my favorite subjects since I enjoy a good bottle of wine with dinner. What do you think is the most popular wine or the biggest wine producer in the world?
I would probably think Italy. I mean, yes, there's so much wine here, and to be honest, I don't know that much about wine, but I would say Italy probably falls like in the top there, no?
Actually, you'd be wrong because it's actually France, believe it or not. It's Italy's nemesis when it comes to winemaking and the different wines that they produce. Italy actually is number 2 in the world in wine production. It produces the most wines in the world, but it isn't number 1.
What do you think makes French wine so much more popular?
Well, I think that they've got the word of mouth, I guess. Everybody keeps talking about, hey, French wine is this and French wine is that, but just kind of like their foods, right? They're really snobby, I guess. But I think that's probably one of the reasons that, they're so popular. But, Italy's, a close trailing second, I guess.
Now, when you talk about French wine versus Italian wine, is the difference really more in like the grape variety, or is it more like a taste? Like, is one sweeter than the other, or not really?
Well, there's so many varieties, right? I'm sure you can find similar wines as what you would find here in Italy, out in France. But I find mostly the wines made in France are more tannic, and they're not as full-bodied most times as the Italian wines, right? They do have their own full-bodied blends, but I find the Italian wines, especially the reds, are very full-bodied and flavorful, especially in certain regions of Italy.
I think a lot of people come to Italy for that, vineyard experience. So I think this really will be a good episode. I think you're going to have to take the lead on that because I don't really know the difference between Barolo from Chianti or anything else, really.
That's fine. I can cover the details on some of the wines that we're going to talk about.
Good times. So what is the most popular region for wine in Italy? I would say Tuscany, right? Isn't it? Like everybody thinks of wine, they think of Tuscany. So I guess would Tuscany be one of the top regions in Italy?
Well, I think everybody talks about Tuscan wines, but it's actually Piedmont is the top region for Italian wines.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That's actually interesting because everybody kind of thinks of Tuscany as being the region for Italian wine. So that's very interesting. Now, I don't know too much about wine, but before we dive into the episode, I thought it would be interesting to talk about the history of winemaking in this region, right? We know that the Romans were really into wine, but before that, they found different records, I guess, during digs and stuff, that wine has been produced in this region for over 4,000 years. That's pretty impressive. That's before even the Romans came along and, there were Greeks, there were Etruscans, there were all kinds of different people who lived here. And I guess wine was a big thing for them. So, of course, the Romans came along and, Romans were obsessed with wine. They've done, like, with wine what they've done with other things. Obviously, wine has been produced here before the Romans. But what the Romans did for wine production is they actually refined the grape press. The process itself would increase the yield of how much wine they got out of the grapes. And also, because they were so obsessed with it, they wanted to reduce the need for shipping wine all over. So that's why they planted vineyards all over the place, near the coastal areas, near like more bigger towns. So, I mean, from that perspective, they were pretty clever. Why ship wine across when you can just grow it in different places? So that's my contribution to this. And I also know that Romans liked their wine a bit more sweet and they liked it more white than red, which I thought was interesting. But they also watered it down and they used to add a lot of different things to wine, including herbs, honey, and chalk. I don't know what wine with chalk would taste like, but I probably think not so good.
Yeah, I don't think that would be pleasing to the palate. They use those concentrates to mass produce it, and then, like you said, they just water it down as they went along. So it'd be quite different from the wines we're used to nowadays.
Now, why do you think wine is such a big part of the Italian culture? Because, I mean, yes, France is. I mean, when I was in France and I visited a family friend, they had different wine with almost every course. I thought at the time was strange. In Italy, I don't really think they switch wines between courses, but wine is typically part of the meal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always been part of the meal with Italian dinners, right? They've always had some sort of homemade wine for a lot of the locals or a lot of the farmers back in the day, and they would have wine with every meal. It enhances the experience of family and getting together, and wine was always involved in all of those sort of events.
Now, I think it's interesting that, well, again, obviously in Canada it's different, but in Italy, they don't really have like a limit how much wine they can serve you. So we've seen like when we go out for dinner, you order usually like a half a liter of wine for yourself. And remember that one time I think it was in Rome, where there was a guy at the table next to us, and I think he had a whole liter of wine by himself.
Yeah, that was actually kind of funny. That was actually shocking too, because, it was an older dude, big guy, but yeah, he was just having his pizza and had his 1 liter of wine, and it was just normal, right?
That is crazy to me again, because in Canada, you are not allowed to serve someone a liter of wine to one person. So from that perspective, I thought that was crazy. But here, they do drink wine, and it seems almost as if it's not really like when we think of wine, we think of like, it's an alcohol, right? Obviously, wine is, but I think in Italy, it's kind of perceived as almost like a side dish to dinner. Like it's kind of hard to describe. I don't think the Italians really sit around and get drunk on wine during dinner, as you might think, because they drink so much of it. But it's a bit of a different culture with it.
Yeah, it goes back years, right? And even when I would visit family in Canada, I'd visit uncles and such. That, you know, in the middle of the afternoon, they'd be eating, a light lunch, some cheese, and then a glass or two of wine with it, right? It's not really something that's common with anyone else.
You hear stories of Italians giving their kids wine at an earlier age. When you guys were growing up, did you guys have that experience? Did you get wine with, like, obviously watered down or whatever? Did you get wine with your meals?
Yeah, funny thing, even as a kid, they'd have you taste the wine, but they'd always mix it. If it's red wine, they'd mix it with a little bit of Coke or something to make it drinkable. White wine would usually be like 7 Up or Sprite added to it, which is kind of gross when you think about it now. But back then, it was normal.
I think Coke and wine, red wine, that just kind of sounds gross. I think the white wine with 7 Up is probably a better combination than Coke and red wine.
Yeah, it's something I wouldn't be doing now, that's for sure.
Let's jump into the wine regions. This is a very interesting topic because, like I said, I don't really drink wine, in particular red wine, but I love to smell the wine. And I usually ask you questions about what does it taste like. And I think for me, as a person who's a non-really wine drinker, I love the smell of red wine. It smells really good. There are a couple of wines that I had. Do you remember the red I tried? I don't remember the name of it that I really enjoyed that you gave me one time and actually I could drink it.
Yeah, of course. And that was an expensive wine, which is the Amarone, the super popular Tuscan wine, right? It's an amazing wine, and it's obviously a lot more expensive than those run-of-the-mill homemade wines or just, the cheaper wines that they sell at some stores.
Now, we didn't really touch on that, but in Italy here, a lot of people make their own wine, right? That's almost a thing. We've had wine that was given to us that like someone made in their house. And to me, that's very strange.
Yeah, many people especially in smaller towns, have land that's family owned, right? So they usually use that land and plant their vines for their vineyards, right? They grow their own grapes, and every year they produce the wine. And most times, depending on how large it is, most times they're able to sell it to local wineries, depending on how strict they are to the growing methods and all that. And obviously they visit the vineyards, but many times smaller families might have it just for friends and family. They'll make some wine, produce it every year, and have it for the full year to have with dinner. But and that's how I always gifted a bottle of wine that's locally made, and it's actually most times it's really good. Surprisingly, and in this region, the more common wine is Aglianico, which we'll talk about later on.
I think it's interesting that in the fall, you have guys that drive around and sell grapes out of the back of the truck for wine. I always say to you, are those grapes really edible? Can we just eat them? Besides that, I think it's interesting because the little grocery store in our town also has homemade wine, right? You told me one time, oh, there's homemade wine on the shelf here.
Yeah, they're allowed to sell homemade wine at local markets, right? So it's not something that is against the law, unlike back in Canada, which is against the law. Obviously, if they catch you, you'd be getting fined or going to jail, right? But here in Italy, it's quite different, the culture.
So anyway, let's go into what I thought was the most popular wine region, and that's Tuscany. To me, as a non-wine drinker, I would think Tuscany is really the wine region. So what are some of the most popular wines or grapes that people will expect to find here in Tuscany?
Yeah, there's a variety of grapes that are used. The most popular wines in this region would be Chiantis, Brunellos, and various other super Tuscans. The Chiantis are probably one of the most popular from the region. It's a full-bodied wine. It's more on the tannic side and needs a lot of aging. You won't find many bottles that are good that are, recently made. So you'll find most of the times it's several years old. You need to let them sit out, decant for a little while when you pour it, sometimes even hours before you're able to drink it. So they're good with heavy meals, which the area is known for, right? They mostly meat-based meals in the area, steaks and such. Florentine steak is super popular. The bistecca alla fiorentina. And then there's the Brunellos, which are super popular. But once again, a lot of aging is required to get it to a level where you can drink it. And then there's, super popular super Tuscans, right? Modern take on Tuscan wines. There are some that are very similar to French wines, Bordeaux-style red wines. And there is that one that's super popular called Sassicaia, which costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the vintage, right? And that's a Bordeaux-style red wine.
So what is Bordeaux, like, I guess it's a region in France, but is Bordeaux also the type of grape or is it a type of wine?
Well, it's an area in France, as you're aware. They grow a certain type of grape because the specific area. I think it's because it's near this, the Garonne River, and it's very specific type of flavor that's imparted to the grape because of that area and the earth that it's grown in.
So the super Tuscans, I don't think I've ever heard that before. Is this like a new thing?
Yeah, so super Tuscans are considered Bordeaux style, and they use the Cabernet Sauvignon grape. So that's where the Sassicaia is very popular. I think it goes back to the 40s, where this specific winery, Tenuta San Guido in Bulgaria, planted the grape and started making wines.
So now, are Tuscan wines mostly red? I think it's something to do with their climate that they produce a certain type of grape, no?
That's correct. The majority are red wines. They're not very well known for anything outside of the red wine or the red grape.
Do you have a favorite wine from Tuscany?
It'd probably be a toss-up between a Brunello or a Chianti. Chiantis are very nice. I haven't had the honor to drink a Sassicaia, which is one of the super Tuscans, because of, the enormous cost to buy a bottle and to even get a hold of one.
How much is it?
Well, they start at a couple €100 for new bottles that are recently produced, but then as the years go on, they go up in price. They're huge for collectors and wine connoisseurs, but they go all up into the thousands of euros for a bottle.
So let's jump into Piedmont, which is apparently bigger than Tuscany. What makes this area so special for wine?
Well, I think the location at the foot of the Alps in Piedmont produces some distinct types of grapes. You'll get the Barolo, which is super popular. These are full-bodied wines and need a ton of aging. You don't find too many fresh ones that are good off the bat. You get the tannic flavors that are more acidic. And then there's the softer type of red wine, the Barbaresco, which is a little less strong. It's not as full bodied as a Barolo. And then you've got the sweeter wines, which is the Moscato d'Asti, which is a sweet sparkling wine that's produced in the area.
You always said that you prefer more full-bodied wine, but do you drink Barolo a lot or no?
Not often. Like I said, I'm more of a value wine drinker, but there are Barolos that are good, right? Obviously they need to be aged like several years before you can drink one.
I guess as a non-wine drinker, I didn't really think of Piedmont as like a big wine producing region, but I guess it is. So would you say that Barolo is probably the most popular wine variety, or the ones from like Tuscany take over?
It's tough to say. I think Barolos are up there, right? Barolo and Chiantis are probably the two most popular types of wines that are sold on the higher end. What's interesting is the grape that's used is called Nebbiolo for the Barolo and Barbaresco, which is it comes from the Italian word nebbia, which is fog. So that actually helps the grape. So the morning mist creates this fog in the morning and it cools the grapes, which causes that strong, intense flavor you get from those wines.
Now, I know we've talked about the wine regions, but I feel like Italy has pretty much every region produces wine, right? So it's kind of hard to pick which wine region would be the one that you should try the wine from. Like, let's talk about some of your favorite wines, because I know you like wine from Puglia, which is not necessarily the top wine region in Italy, but it's one that you like a lot.
Yeah, those are the lesser known wines that are popular, but they're not obviously as popular as the ones from up north.
Now, the one that you like, what's the name of it again?
Well, the one that I specifically like isn't very well known. It's the Nero di Troia, and that's the wine that's made in Puglia. It's one of the less expensive wines. It's more of a value wine, but it's very similar in strength to the Tuscan wines and the ones from Piedmont. So I think it's one of the better wines for the price, and I think they'll probably age pretty well.
Now, what about Sicily? We talk about Sicily quite a bit, but I don't think we've talked about Sicily from the wine perspective. I know that there is Marsala, which is famous for that, more of a sweeter wine. It's more of a dessert wine, but there's other places in Sicily that are also known for wine, no?
Yeah, definitely. There's the Veneto d'Avola, which is, Sicily. It's one of the more well-known Sicilian wines. Very bold in flavor. It's good for aging. And it goes really well with many of the spicy foods that are found in Sicily, the heavier type of meals you would have.
Now, we stayed in Avola when we were in Sicily, and I think the only reason we knew about it was because of the wine.
Yeah, that's right. That was a nice place to have the base of operations, as they say there. And I enjoyed the different types of Veneto d'Avola wines that I tried there.
Now, there's also the Etna Rosso, which I don't think I've heard before, but are you familiar with that kind of wine?
It's one of the lesser known wines, and you don't find them very often. It's not my style of wine. I think it's more of a tannic, minerally flavored wine because of the fact that it's grown on Mount Etna's volcanic slopes, right? So it's got a little, it's a bolder grape, which requires a lot of time.
Now, let's talk about where we live. So we live in Campania, and I'm actually quite surprised how much wine there is in this region, right? We have both the red and the whites that are produced in this area.
Yeah, there's a wide variety of grapes that are grown here, right? Because of the varying climates. You got the colder, mountainous areas that grow the Aglianico, which are, a bold, uh, full-bodied wine. And it's actually really good. You'll find even ones that are just sold locally unbottled as a house wine, right? Then you have all the various white types of wines from Avellino, Fiano, Fiume di San Gregorio. So there's so many types of whites that are actually pretty impressive, and they're really good.
I think the first year we were here, we went to like a wine event when we sampled the different wines. And I was actually quite surprised at how much of a variety of the flavors they had here. I think there was one, remember, I felt like it tasted, I don't know if it was the flavor or the smell of it. It reminded me of butter. And I thought it was kind of strange, but there was no other way of describing it. So this wine was very flavorful, but also very mild, which, again, I'm not a wine person, so I think describing it is not necessarily, I'm not doing it justice.
Yeah, it's probably either, Falangina or Fiano that are common in this region. It's on the sweeter side and smoother compared to some of the other whites that are out there. So yeah, there's a wide variety of grapes that they use for these white wines.
Now, let's talk about the area we're moving to, which is Abruzzo. So Abruzzo has quite a bit of wine production there too. And we've been trying different ones, but I almost feel like Abruzzo wine is more of the white, not the red.
Well, they're known for both, right? There's the Pecorino, which is one of our favorites here. It's a bit on the sweeter side, not as dry. And then there's the Montepulciano, the Abruzzo, which is a very popular red wine.
What's the one that we drink a lot that sounds like a cheese?
Yeah, it's the Pecorino.
Okay.
Yes, that's the one we usually drink, which is on the sweeter side.
See, I don't mind that one. I think that one is pretty good. And there are also some areas of Italy. Now, we know Prosecco, which I drink Prosecco, so I like that. But there's also some other areas where they make, obviously not Prosecco, but it's almost like a similar fizzy wine. I know they have some of it here in our area too, right? Like they have it in Abruzzo and other parts of Italy as well.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to make a sparkling wine, right? There's obviously more sugars involved, and that's how you get the the bubbles sometimes. But yeah, there's a bunch of different areas that are well known for sparkling wines, like in Trentino, Alto Adige. There's sparkling wines like the Trento Doc. Then there's I don't even know how you pronounce it, the Gewürztraminer, and that's more of on the floral side, and I think more mimics the types of wines you find in Germany.
I think I'm more into the German wine because it's sweeter, right? I used to drink the white wine that was from Germany. It's a bit sweeter. I think the French wines and red wines in general are a bit more dry, right? They're not as sweet. And I think that's why I can't really drink them.
Yeah, the French ones are usually a lot drier, right? There are ones that aren't as dry and more on the sweeter end of things, but those are a lot more expensive and aged somewhat, right? So you'll find very similar wines, but the price difference is pretty noticeable when it comes to wines because obviously you have French wine, the name, everybody likes French wine. So they kind of take advantage of that and price them as such.
So now, if someone's coming to Italy and they want to indulge in wine, so do you have any recommendations for like what kind of wine? Like, should they do red or should they do white? Would they do pasta? Or I know there is certain rules for what you're supposed to drink. Like with fish, you're supposed to drink white and so on. What kind of wines would you recommend to people coming to Italy?
Usually it's whatever your preference is, right? You don't have to follow the stringent guidelines they have here in Italy. White wines usually pair better with fish and lighter cheeses. But when you get to sharper cheeses and heavier meals that include meat, most times you're looking at red. Enhance the flavors of the meal. Going with a white would mute the wine itself and doesn't really pair well. You can always go with what your preference is, but it's mostly best to follow those type of guidelines. Lighter meals, white wines, fish, and then for heavier meals and cheeses, you're looking at a red wine.
You always order the house wine because they sometimes have different varieties. Do you think there's a difference or advantage of ordering the house wine versus another brand?
I like to gauge the quality of the wines in that region by trying their house wines. Most times you'll be surprised at how good they are actually, and the value is there, right? It's going to be a lot cheaper than a bottled wine. Italians always say it's more authentic if you get locally produced house wines. They don't have additives, supposedly, according to what they say. It's more authentic, right? It's small batch type of stuff that local farms or local families might produce in small batches and provide to the restaurants, right?
Okay, so trying house wine is always a good idea. I think another great suggestion is if you're coming to Italy during the harvest season, so usually it's like September, October, it's a really good time, especially if you're into wine, to visit wineries. There's a lot of activity going on at that time. And sometimes, I don't know, I've read about this, that they let you participate in grape picking. I haven't really come across it ourselves yet. But I think if you come during the harvest season, you'll be able to experience sort of more of an active, I don't know if active is the right word, but you're going to be able to see the winery at its best.
Yeah, I agree. I think the word you were trying to search for was interactive, right? So you get involved with how a wine producer produces their wine, right? They can attend some of the booths that they might have at these wine festivals and even get an explanation of how their vineyard is set up, whether they have tours, which is highly recommended also if you find a wine that you enjoy. So yeah, that's one of the ways to enjoy these festivals.
I think the word I was looking for was immersive, but I think you're right. Interactive also works. If you're coming at any time of the year, but you like a particular wine, I think you're right. I think they do tours and tastings at all kinds. Not all wineries, I think, in Italy do that. But, if you want to experience wine tastings, you can always sign up for a walking tour or one of those tours that take you to different wineries. That's also a great way to taste the local flavors of the wine. All of Italy, I think every region produces wine. So you're going to have you can have opportunity to taste the different wines no matter where you are in Italy.
Yeah, and my recommendation, if you're interested in a type of wine, find a specific winery you might be interested in and just look them up, see if they have wine tours, which most places do have. And a lot of the times they have really nice high-end restaurants that you can get a chance to pair wines that they may not make available publicly.
I think no matter where you go, like you said, house wine is a good opportunity to sort of taste the local flavors, but also gauge their wine. If you're coming to whatever region you're in, you can always ask for the local house wine, and that will give you a bit more of the flavor profile. The people who work in a restaurant can recommend what wine goes best with the meal you're having because they're the ones that make it, right? So I think it's also a great opportunity, especially if you're more into you want to try different flavor profiles, different type of wines. Ask the waiter or the people at the restaurant what the local wine is, the house wine, and try it. That's always a good way to learn about new wines as well.
Now, if you're interested in the culinary side of things, there's food and wine pairing classes that you can attend. Many farm stays or agriturismos offer cooking classes where you can learn, locally made foods or local wines and pair the two together. You'll learn a thing or two about wines that you're interested in.
The pasta making class I took in Rome, we also were trying local wine that went with it. That's also a good idea. You're right. You can have, whatever class you're taking, they'll also have local wine that goes with every meal. So I think that's a perfect opportunity to discover what the local wine is, because you might also find wine that you might not find where you are, right? Because not all the wine that we had, let's say in Canada from Italy, wasn't always everything that they have, right? I almost feel like not all countries export all of their offerings. So the wine that we find here, you might not find where you are, right? Which is also another opportunity to learn what the local flavors are.
Yeah, I agree. I think the next thing that many listeners are interested in is purchasing wines. So, when you visit a winery, there are many times you can purchase the wine that you're interested in by the case or however many bottles, and many times they're able to ship it. So you can have the winery ship it internationally and have them worry about packaging, customs, stuff like that.
I think that's also good to mention that it's easier for them to ship it to you than if you bring it with you, because every country has restrictions on how much alcohol you can bring with you, right? So make sure that you check what your country rules are for bringing wine into your country. But again, you can have it sent directly to your house and just not deal with that problem.
Yeah, you're right. Definitely look into the customs regulations in the country you're going back to. So if you're visiting Italy for some wine tasting and visiting the various wineries, you won't be disappointed. Every region in Italy has their own style of wines that you can enjoy. So definitely plan ahead and see what interests you, and maybe book some wine tastings.